Thank you. Thanks very much. And good evening to everybody, and thank you for coming, and thank you for that very warm reception. And thank you as well to the Lannan Foundation for inviting me to Santa Fe, which I've discovered over the course of the last day and a half is a beautiful city. It's my first time here. And I'm especially delighted to have been invited to kick off what certainly will be a very exciting and vibrant speaker series that the Lannan Foundation is sponsoring. So I'm particularly pleased to be here for that as well. I've been speaking more at events like this and at various college campuses and the like over the last year. And one of the things that typically happens before the event is that there's a lot of time and mental energy spent on figuring out what the topic of the speech is going to be and what the title is going to be. And the speaker and the sponsors of the event go back and forth over what will be an interesting topic, what's timely, what will be interesting to people. And then the title gets worked on and changed and edited. And I have several speeches planned over the next course of the month, and there's all different topics and titles that were all worked out as part of this arduous process. And what I found is that as much time and energy is spent on that process, it actually ends up being completely irrelevant, because I find that no matter what the topic is, I keep speaking about the same set of issues no matter what the title is. And the reason why that happens is not because I have some monomaniacal obsession with a handful of issues that I just can't pry myself away from no matter what the topic is. That may be true, but that's not actually the reason. The reason is because political controversies and political issues never take place in isolation. They're always part of some broader framework that drives political outcomes and that determines how political power is exercised. And so it doesn't really matter which specific topic or which specific controversy of the day you want to discuss. The reality is you can't really meaningfully discuss any of them without examining all of the forces that shape political culture and that shape how political outcomes are determined. And so in order to talk about any issue, you end up speaking about these same broad themes that are shaping and I think plaguing the political discourse in the United States. This is something that I first realized when I started writing about politics in late 2005. And one of the very first topics on which I focused was the scandal involving the Bush administration's eavesdropping on American citizens without the warrants required by law. And this was first exposed by the New York Times in December of 2005, so it actually happened around 6 weeks after I started writing about politics. And I had this, back then, very naive idea that this was going to be a fairly straightforward and simple political controversy. And the reason I thought that, in my naivete, was because what the Bush administration got caught doing, eavesdropping on Americans without warrants from the FISA court, is as clear as could possibly be a felony under American law. Like, you can actually look at the criminal law that existed since 1978 when FISA was enacted, and it says that doing exactly what the Bush administration got caught doing is a felony in the United States, just like robbing a bank or extortion or murder, and that it's punishable by a prison term of 5 years or a $10,000 fine for each offense. And the report that the New York Times published was that there were at least hundreds and probably thousands of instances where American citizens were eavesdropped on illegally and and in violation of the law. So I thought that this was going to be a fairly straightforward controversy, because I had this idea that if you get caught committing a felony and the New York Times writes and reports on that and everybody is talking about that, that's actually going to be a really bad thing for the person who got caught doing that. I know it was really naive. I'm actually embarrassed to admit that I thought that, but that really is what I thought at the time.
Well, we've got lots of questions and about 30 minutes to get through some of them. Let me just start, if I can have that privilege. You mentioned Eisenhower's farewell address. It was just marked in a few columns here and there, the 50th anniversary. You know, after he made that warning in the very next paragraph, the warning about the military-industrial complex, He did say that there was one thing that could put a brake on it, and that was an informed and knowledgeable citizenry. Which goes to the whole question of the role of the media in being a conduit for information or misinformation or propaganda.
Right. Well, one of the things that I think, one of the interesting things is that before I began writing about politics, and what that has enabled me to do is to focus full time on it in a way that you can't do when you actually have, a job. Before I began writing about politics, I thought that I was a fairly well-informed consumer of news. I did things like, dutifully read the New York Times, and I would read, magazines and watch high-end news programs and the like. And I assumed that there were things that I was getting that were not entirely accurate. I was a litigator, so I generally assume that people are lying constantly. It's just a risk of the profession. But I thought that by and large I was getting the basic story right about what the United States is and what it does in the world. And one of the things that was really so eye-opening for me, and again, there is a little bit of a naivete to it, is that once I actually was able to start focusing on these things full time and reading original documents for myself and not having to rely on the mediation of the media and being able to pick and choose what I would focus on rather than having editors decide for me what I needed to know about and what I didn't, was that essentially all the, not just individual facts, but the broad narrative that I was getting was really radically flawed. And I basically erased the part of my brain that had existed that thought that it had stored accurate political information, and kind of rebuilt it from scratch. And one of the things that, today always is so remarkable to me is that there are enormously consequential events that exist, for example, in the Muslim world, that are constantly displayed on their news programs and on their newspapers that are literally unmentioned in the American media. And that has created this extraordinarily huge gap in the perception in that part of the world and this part of the world. And we like to assume that the reason why that gap exists is because they're these primitive fundamentalists who are propagandized and who aren't told the truth by their media and about the government. And there is to some extent to which that is true, but there's a huge extent to which the opposite is true, which is that the reason this perception gap exists is because we are propagandized, and there's so much that happens that we don't know about that they do.